Hello and welcome to the cards you need for pre-modern Magic. Except a quick disclaimer, you obviously don't need these. This is much more of a list of cards that you need to know rather than cards that you need to own. It's just a list of commonly played cards that see play in a lot of decks. However, we will be looking at the generic all-around cards rather than the archetype-specific cards, so you won't see things like Goblin Lackey, Goblin Ringleader, Terravor, Phyrexian Dreadnought in this list, as those are popular and played cards, however they're very archetype-specific. We're looking at the more all-around cards. And we're going to start with lands and work all our way through all the colours until we get to artifacts at the end. And so starting with lands, we of course start with the Pain lands. These go in almost all pre-modern decks and are the core of most decks' mana bases. They're just excellent cards, and these are probably the closest to the ones that you must own. We also have the Fetch lands and the other multicolor lands. So City of Brass and Gemstone Mine are the most common, then Reflecting Pool, and then the Lair lands as they're called. And the filter lands, particularly Skycloud Expanse, is becoming much more popular over time. And then the soul lands, which help to accelerate our mana. Ancient Tomb is by far the most common one, although decks that want to speed up their curve and can handle the colorless mana will play these. And the mana denial lands are some of the most commonly played ones throughout the format. They're incredibly strong, especially in combination, so you will see these in a lot of different decks. Usually decks play either one or the other of Rishadan Port or Wasteland, but sometimes they do play both together. And then moving on to manlands, Mishra's Factory and Treetop Village are by far the most common ones that you see a lot of. Treetop Village is actually more of a green card, which is a perfect segue into the green cards. So Birds of Paradise and Wall of Roots see play in quite a lot of decks, particularly in combo ones to help with the mana situation. Birds can fix the mana, while Wall of Roots is a good blocker as well. Wall of Blossoms is a similar kind of thing, it can block and draw us a card. And Call of the Herd is an incredibly good value card. A 3/3 is actually quite big in pre-modern as well, so this card sees play in a lot of green decks and sideboards. Ravenous Baloth, or Baloth depending on how you pronounce that, also sees play in a lot of lists, as a 4/4 body is very big and the life gain can really help against certain decks. These two are the key go-to green value engines. Sylvan Library just helps us to draw a bunch of cards and filter through our deck, and Survival is becoming increasingly common in all kinds of combo decks, value decks, as just the go-to tutor for creatures that can also generate you huge amounts of value. And Naturalize is just one of the most played cards in the format. It's an incredible sideboard card and just a very, very good card in general. And so moving on to the black cards now, Cabal Therapy and Duress go in pretty much every single black deck. Every deck running black will run either one of these, if not both. They're just incredibly, incredibly strong disruption cards. And black is also very well known for removal. These ones are the most common ones that you see all the time. It really does depend on metagame and personal choice. And so every deck that can use black mana uses Engineered Plague. It's just one of the best sideboard cards out there. Plague Spitter is kind of like an alternative version of that, and sometimes it's much more popular. It hasn't been so popular recently, but it's still a very, very well-known card. As is Dystopia, which goes in every single mono black sideboard and every sideboard for a black deck that's not playing green or white. And the next are just very, very common black cards you see all the time. Phyrexian Negator is an incredible sideboard card against control decks. Phyrexian Arena is just an absolute value engine, and Dark Ritual is Dark Ritual. It just speeds you up by so much. And moving on to the red cards here, red is a little difficult to do because most of red's most played cards are actually goblins or sly cards and don't really go into other decks. However, these two are the ones that do see the most splash kind of play. But other than these two and the goblins and sly cards, red is mostly a support color, so it's known for its sideboard cards such as Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast, which are incredible against blue decks and see play in every sideboard that has red. You also see Pyroclasm in a lot of those decks, and Overload to kill artifacts. And Pyrokinesis goes in a lot of red decks to fight other aggro decks, so it's also very common as well. And honorable mention to Squee, which goes in any deck that's looking to discard cards. It goes in every deck with Survival, and it is becoming just a very, very commonly played card. And moving on to blue, which has a lot of generically played good cards. These are some of the most common card draw spells that you'll see, although obviously blue has a lot of card draw spells, and there really are just a lot of them. These are the most common. These are the next most common, as most control decks do play a few copies of Fact or Fiction, and most combo decks do play a few copies of Frantic Search or Careful Study or both. Intuition also goes in basically every combo deck that plays blue. It's a very commonly seen card. And I didn't forget Standstill, which randomly sees splash play in a lot of these 5-color aggro decks, as well as being a good control deck in its own right. And blue, of course, famous for counter magic. These ones are by far the most popular, with Mana Leak and Counterspell being the most popular too. Forbid sees a lot of play in control decks as a way to lock out the late game. And these ones are also very popular, especially in mono blue decks, with Daze being very good in aggressive or combo style decks, and Thwart in the more control style decks, and Foil being kind of like a happy middle ground. Chain of Vapor is becoming increasingly played, as not only does it combo with quite a few other cards, it's also just a very reasonable bounce spell in its own right, and is seeing just much more play than before. And moving on to the sideboard cards, blue has some amazing anti-red cards in the form of Chill and Blue Elemental Blast, which do see play in most blue sideboards, as does Annul, which is an excellent answer for artifacts and enchantments. And Teferi's Response is becoming increasingly popular against all of those mana disruption strategies, and Stifle is a card that sees play in a lot of main decks in specific combos, but it's also quite a common sideboard card as well. And moving on to white, we have some absolute all-stars. Swords to Plowshares is one of the most played cards in the entire format, and basically every white control deck is playing a few copies of Wrath of God to deal with creatures. We also have some incredible creatures in our own right. Basically, every control deck with white is playing Decree of Justice, every creature deck with white is playing Mother of Runes, and Exalted Angel is in almost every white deck, either in the main deck or the sideboard somehow. We also have some incredibly strong removal for artifacts and enchantments. Actually, Seal of Cleansing is usually a bit more popular due to this card, Enlightened Tutor, which a lot of decks do actually play as a package to tutor up specific things that they need, including Seal of Cleansing. And also including the next two cards, as basically every control deck with white plays Circle of Protection red, and every creature deck with white plays Worship. You may see it in the main or the sideboard. And a lot of those creature decks with white also play Armageddon in the sideboard as a way to destroy control. And there weren't actually that many multicolored cards back in the pre-modern days, so you will notice almost all of these are from the same block. You really don't see as many multicolored cards as you'd expect, but you will see these in most of the decks that play their colors, not all of them though. These are the most common removal spells. These ones you will see in every deck that play their colors. Every red-green deck plays Hullbreach, every green-white deck plays Ray of Revelation. They're just incredibly strong at what they do. And you will see Meddling Mage in basically every blue-white deck. It's a very, very common card. And Phantom Nishoba is just the go-to big creature that a lot of decks that are looking to cheat big things into play, they usually go to Phantom Nishoba first. And there are a lot of incredibly good support artifacts, including these two that deal with graveyards. Depending on what your deck does, depends on which one you'll want to run, but you'll definitely want some copies of these in basically every single sideboard. If you want to deal with artifacts, then you might see Null Rod, as it is very common, and Cursed Totem is incredibly good at dealing with creature combos, so also sees a lot of play. As do these cards. Powder Keg is great removal for specific creatures and artifacts. Mastercore just guns down small creatures, as well as being a very resilient threat in its own right. And Curse Scroll is also very good against small creatures, or as a way to finish off those slower decks. Defense Grid is very good against control strategies that look to use instants, and Cyber's Web and Winter Orb are very good against control decks, as it can really hamper their mana and stop them from doing their game plan or reacting to you. And Ensnaring Bridge is becoming an increasingly common sideboard card against big creature decks such as Reanimator, Stiflenaut, or Big Terravores. And this one is by far the most controversial, Mox Diamond, because it is very, very expensive. You absolutely don't need to own this one, to win and to have fun, but it does see play in a lot of different decks. Although there are many decks that absolutely don't want to run it at all, it's not a must own. So how do you think I did, guys? Did I miss anything in the video? Are there some cards that I forgot? Please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching and see you next time.